If you look closely at economic history, you'll notice that certain numbers, once reached, completely changed the rules of the game. $400 trillion. That is the approximate size of the accumulated global debt when you add up governments, companies, and households around the world. To put it in perspective, that's about 4 times the value of everything the global economy produces in an entire year. This is not an apocalyptic prediction. I'm observing a pattern that is repeated throughout history. When you understand patterns, you understand consequences. The question isn't if there will be a crisis. The question is when and how it will unfold, because the math behind this number isn't sustainable. And math, unlike politics or hope, doesn't negotiate. You might be thinking, but this is a problem for governments and central banks, not me. And that's exactly where the danger lies. Because when financial systems collapse, it's not just numbers on screens that vanish. It's jobs, it's pensions, it's the purchasing power of the money you saved for decades. Today, we'll understand together how we got here, why this matters to you, and what my observations of history teach us about navigating such waters. History is an excellent teacher, and it shows us time and again that cycles of unsustainable debt are nothing new. They are, in fact, one of the most predictable forces in the rise and fall of civilizations. Let's go back in time for a moment. I've seen it in Rome, 3rd century. The Roman Empire faced expensive wars, borders impossible to defend, and a population accustomed to benefits the treasury could no longer afford. The solution? Devalue the currency. They mixed silver with cheap metals in the coins. The result? Massive inflation. The bread that cost 1 denarius began to cost thousands. Trust in the monetary system collapsed, and with it, the empire itself. I've seen it in France, 1789. Before the French Revolution, the monarchy was suffocating under debt. Wars, extravagant spending, and an unfair tax structure created a ticking time bomb. When they tried printing more money, the assignats inflation destroyed the economy. What followed? Guillotine, chaos, Napoleon. I've seen it in Germany, 1923. The hyperinflation of Weimar is perhaps the most dramatic example I've observed from the 20th century. The debt from World War I forced the German government to print uncontrolled amounts of money. People carried cash in wheelbarrows to buy bread. Savings were wiped out. The middle class was destroyed. And we know what came next. Perfect conditions for political extremism. I've seen it in the United States, 1929 and 2008. In 1929, it was excessive leverage in the stock market. In 2008, excessive leverage in the housing market. Both cases followed the same pattern: easy credit, euphoria, denial of risk, and then brutal correction. What do all these events have in common? First, debt growing faster than the ability to pay. Second, political decisions that choose to postpone the pain instead of facing it. Third, the belief that this time is different, but it's never different. The details change, the essence remains. To understand where we are, we need to understand how debt cycles work. It's not complicated. It's just cause and effect. Think of it this way. When the economy is doing well, people borrow. With easy credit, they spend more. Spending creates demand. Demand creates jobs. Jobs create income, and the economy grows. But eventually, the accumulated debt starts to weigh down. People and businesses must pay interest. Less money is left to spend. Demand drops. The economy slows. Recession comes. Then the central bank steps in, they lower interest rates, money becomes cheap again, the cycle restarts. It's like breathing: expansion, contraction, expansion, contraction. Here's where things get serious. With each short cycle, total debt increases a bit. At first, it's manageable. Productivity grows, people earn more, debt is serviceable. But after decades, the debt reaches a point where it can no longer grow. Interest rates are near zero. There's no room left to cut rates. And the debt is so large that repayment becomes impossible without severe pain. It's like using a credit card. At first, it's helpful. You buy what you need, pay the bills. But if you only pay the minimum every month, eventually the debt grows so large that even the interest is unaffordable. You hit the limit. And that's exactly where we are now. When a system reaches its limit, my observations show three things can happen. Austerity. Spending is drastically cut. Governments do this when they have no choice. But austerity causes recession, unemployment, and political instability. It's painful. Redistribution, tax the rich to pay off debt. This is politically difficult, and if done too aggressively, it can destroy incentives to invest and produce. Money printing, the central bank creates new money to pay debt. It seems magical, but it's not. It dilutes the value of every existing dollar. The result? Inflation, sometimes hyperinflation. Historically, nations choose the third path because it's politically easier. The pain is silently distributed through inflation instead of through visible cuts. But this choice has consequences, and those are the consequences you will feel in your wallet. Now, let's connect this to the $400 trillion. That number didn't come out of nowhere. It was built over decades, especially after the 2008 crisis. When the financial system nearly collapsed in 2008, central banks around the world made a choice. Save the system by printing money on an unprecedented scale. Interest rates were cut to zero or even negative in some countries. Governments spent trillions on stimulus. Did it work? Yes. In the short term, the economy recovered, but the cost was postponing the problem and making it much bigger. With low interest rates, borrowing became irresistible. Governments funded massive deficits. Companies took on debt to buy back their own shares, inflating prices artificially. Families bought homes with increasingly larger mortgages, and everyone assumed rates would stay low forever. But they didn't. In 2022 and 2023, inflation returned, and central banks were forced to raise rates quickly. Suddenly, all that cheap debt became expensive. Imagine a family that bought a house with a 3% interest rate. Now, refinancing means paying 7%. Many people can't afford it. The same goes for companies and governments. Let's do a simple calculation. If global debt is $400 trillion and the average interest rate is 3%, just the interest on that debt is $12 trillion per year. The global economy produces about $100 trillion per year. That means 12% of all economic output goes just to pay interest, not to build roads, educate children, or develop technology, just to service debt. And if interest rates rise to 5%, debt interest rises to $20 trillion, 1/5 of all the world's wealth production. That's not sustainable. And when something isn't sustainable, eventually it stops being sustained. Based on what I've observed, three possible scenarios emerge. Scenario one, prolonged recession. Governments and companies cut spending to reduce debt. Less spending means less demand. Less demand means unemployment. Unemployment means less income. The economy shrinks. Savings are preserved, but jobs vanish. Scenario two, high inflation. Central banks print money to avoid collapse. Debt in nominal terms can be paid, but the real value of money falls. You still have the same 1,000, but they buy half of what they used to. Jobs are preserved, but savings are eroded. Scenario three, debt restructuring. Governments and banks negotiate partial debt forgiveness. Creditors accept less payment. It's an organized form of default. It causes financial turbulence, but is an attempt to reset the system. My observation of history suggests we'll see a combination of all three. A bit of recession, a bit of inflation, and some organized defaults. Let me illustrate with concrete examples of how these cycles affect real people. Story one, the retiree in government bonds. Imagine John, 68, retired. He saved money his whole life and invested in U.S. government bonds, always considered the safest investment in the world. In 2020, He had $1 million in bonds, paying 2% annually. That gave him $20,000 in income. In 2023, interest rates rose and old bonds lost value. John's portfolio is now worth $700,000, and inflation is eating into his purchasing power. Milk, gas, medicine all rose 25% in 3 years. John did nothing wrong, but the debt cycle hit him anyway. Story 2, the average company. Think of a manufacturing company. In 2015, it took a $10 million loan at 3% interest to expand. Seems smart. The economy was growing. Now, in 2024, it needs to refinance, but rates are at 8%. Monthly payments have tripled. The company has 3 options: lay off employees, cut investments, or shut down. It chooses to lay off 30% of its staff. Those employees lose their jobs. They spend less. Other companies feel the impact. The ripple effect begins. Story 3, the emerging country. A Latin American country borrowed dollars when the dollar was weak, using the money to build infrastructure. Now the dollar is strong. The debt in local currency has doubled. The government can't pay. It must choose: pay foreign creditors or pay local teachers and doctors. It chooses the creditors. Protests erupt. Political stability vanishes. These are not hypothetical scenarios. They are patterns I see repeatedly when debt cycles reach their limits. You might be thinking, okay, I understand the patterns, but what do I do about it? First, we need to be clear. No one has a crystal ball. I'm not saying I know exactly when or how the crisis will come, but I know the conditions are aligned. And when conditions are aligned, preparation is not paranoia, it's prudence. How does this affect your retirement? If you are 50 or older, your recovery window from a crisis is limited. You don't have 30 years to wait for the markets to recover. A debt crisis can manifest in 3 ways for you. Inflation, your money buys less. The $3,000 monthly retirement that once seemed comfortable now feels tight. Asset collapse, stocks, real estate, and bonds can fall by 30%, 40%, 50%. If you have to sell at the bottom to pay bills, you lock in the loss. Benefit cuts. Struggling governments cut benefits. Social Security may be adjusted. Medicare may have reduced coverage. None of this is guaranteed, but it is plausible. And what is plausible deserves preparation. How does this affect your job? Indebted companies cut costs. The first cut is always personnel. If your company or industry is highly leveraged, your job is at risk. Most vulnerable sectors: non-essential retail, construction, credit-dependent manufacturing, and discretionary services. More resilient sectors: healthcare, basic utilities, essential tech, and food. How does this affect your savings? If your money is in the bank, you're exposed to inflation. If it's in stocks, you're exposed to volatility. If it's in bonds, you're exposed to value losses if interest rates keep rising. There is no 100% safe place, but there are ways to reduce risk. Now, let's get to what matters: concrete actions based on solid principles. Principle 1, true diversification. Diversification is not owning 20 different stocks. It means having assets that respond differently to the same conditions. In a debt crisis with inflation, consider tangible assets, well-located real estate, not speculative, precious metals in modest amounts, 5 to 10% of the portfolio, essential commodities, uncorrelated assets, shares of companies with pricing power that can pass on costs, inflation-protected securities like TIPS in the U. Strong currencies from countries with low debt. Liquidity keeps 6 to 12 months of expenses in cash. Yes, inflation erodes it, but crises bring opportunities, and opportunities require liquidity. Principle 2, reduce your own leverage. If governments and companies are over-indebted, you don't need to be. Pay down expensive debt, credit cards, personal loans. A 15% plus rate is a huge burden in tough times. Reevaluate mortgages. If your mortgage is variable, consider fixing it. If it's fixed and low, keep it. Inflation reduces the real weight of debt. Avoid new commitments. It's not the time to finance luxury cars or expensive renovations. Preserve flexibility. Principle 3, increase your resilience. Resilience is the ability to absorb shocks without breaking. Adaptable skills. Invest in learning things that will always have value. Communication, problem solving, practical technical skills. Support networks. Community matters. In a crisis, having neighbors, friends, and family nearby makes a huge difference. Physical and mental health. These are underestimated assets. The healthier you are, the less vulnerable you are to external shocks. Principle 4, think in real terms, not nominal. $1 million sounds like a lot, but what matters is not the number, it's what that million can buy. If inflation's 7% a year, in 10 years, your million buys what $500,000 does today. You didn't lose money nominally, but you lost purchasing power. Always ask, does this asset preserve real value? Principle 5, humility in the face of uncertainty. I don't know if the crisis will come in 2025, 2027, or 2030. I don't know if it will be severe inflation, deep recession, or both. And that's exactly why diversification and preparation matter. It's not about guessing the forecast. It's about being ready for multiple scenarios. As I often say, I'd rather be vaguely right than precisely wrong. We don't need to guess. We can observe. Here are indicators worth watching, warning signs I pay attention to. Inverted yield curve. When short-term interest rates are higher than long-term ones, it historically precedes recessions. Falling velocity of money. When money circulates less, it means confidence is low. Rising corporate defaults. When companies start collapsing in large numbers, it signals systemic stress. Political signals, rising extremism, economic crises fuel polarization. If extreme rhetoric gains strength, economic stress is showing politically. Protectionist policies. When countries start closing economic borders, it's because they're trying to protect scarce resources. Drastic monetary changes. If a country radically changes its monetary policy, for example, adopts capital controls, it's a sign of desperation. Social signals, frequent protests, public dissatisfaction is a thermometer of economic pain. When the brightest minds leave a country, it's because they see limited future changes in consumer behavior. Changes in consumer behavior. If people start stockpiling essentials, it's because they feel insecure. No single sign means an imminent crisis. But when many appear together, it's time to pay attention. If you've made it this far, you now understand more about debt cycles than 95% of people. And that alone is an advantage. History teaches us something fundamental. Cycles are inevitable. Euphoria leads to excess. Excess leads to correction. Correction leads to caution. Caution leads to opportunity. And opportunity leads to the next euphoria. The $400 trillion isn't the end of the world. It's the end of a cycle and the beginning of another. Empires change. Reserve currencies change. Economic systems change. But principles remain. The principle of cause and effect. Excessive debt leads to correction. The principle of balance. Extremes in any direction eventually correct. The principle of adaptation. Those who prepare survive, those who ignore suffer. You don't control the cycles, but you control how you position yourself within them. And perhaps the most important lesson, true wealth is not measured in dollars, it's measured in freedom. Freedom to choose, freedom to act, freedom to not be forced into desperate decisions in desperate times. When you understand cycles, you gain one precious thing, perspective. And in turbulent times, perspective is worth more than gold. This is not a prediction. It's a logical consequence. And consequences, pleasant or not, demand preparation. The question is not if you'll be affected by the $400 trillion crisis. The question is, Will you be prepared when it arrives? Because it will arrive. Not because I or anyone else says so, but because math doesn't forgive, and cycles, by definition, don't stop. History is an excellent teacher. It's up to us to be good students. If you want more people to understand the world clearly and based on principles, share this video. And if you want to keep following analyses like this, subscribe to the channel.